Doamnelor și domnilor, suntem în legătură prin Zoom cu Rachel Givney din Australia ca să discutăm despre cea mai recentă carte a sa, de fapt un debut literar, Jane și Magia iubirii, apărută la editura RAO, așa că vom discuta puțin despre această carte. Hello, Rachel, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
First of all, I want to ask you, why did you choose Jane Austen? Because she's a very well-known figure and writer, obviously. Everyone knows her, and she's been made into films, and her life has been picked and looked at and analyzed. And why did you choose Jane Austen?
Great question. I first read a Jane Austen novel when I was 15. I read Emma on the train on the way home from school. And I had no knowledge of Jane Austen at the time. I was just looking for something to read on the train home, and I read it and I loved it. I was struck by the wit and the humour and the beautiful love story. I had no knowledge of Jane Austen at the time, so I looked her up. I researched her biography, and I discovered that she never married or had any children. And I felt disarmed that this writer of this beautiful love story died a spinster. I was considering a career as a writer myself, and I grew curious, and I researched the biographies of other famous female writers, Emily Dickinson, Charlotte Bronte, Emily Bronte, Mary Louise Alcott, Louisa May Alcott rather. All of these women, they either had disastrous romantic lives or none at all. And so I began to wonder, does an artist, namely a female artist, need to be single in order to write? And if Jane Austen had to choose between love and her career, what would she choose? And that's how Jane in Love was born. So I chose Jane Austen because she's the most famous of all the writers, of all these female writers who wrote these beautiful love stories in the English language. And she never married or had any children. And that really struck me and made me curious to think about what would she choose if she had to.
Yes, and did you travel to Bath to do the research, because Bath is very important in your book?
Yes, I did. So Bath, which is a city in the west of England, is virtually unchanged from Jane Austen's time. When Jane Austen lived there in the very early 1800s, she was there until about 1805, I think. That was when Bath was at its heyday. It was the most fashionable and popular place to go on holiday in England. And so I went to Bath numerous times, and I went to all the places where it was known that Jane Austen lived, or that she visited, that she went to an assembly or a ball or a theatre production. I went to all the places, and I went to the Roman baths, which is a major scene in the novel.
Yes.
And one interesting thing that I discovered was that Bath is such a beautiful place, but it's the place that everybody in England went to marry. You went to Bath to find a husband, and Jane went to Bath to find a husband. She didn't want to go herself. Her parents took her there because she was, I think she might have been 25 at the time, and they were very anxious to see her married. And she didn't like Bath. Even though Bath was so beautiful, she didn't like it because there was so much pressure for her to find a husband. And when she lived in Bath, she wrote absolutely nothing. It was only once she left Bath and the question of whether she would marry or not was over, was finished. She wasn't going to marry. Then her writing career flourished.
How did you imagine the situations and everything that she encounters in the 21st century. What was it like to write those things, to put them to page?
Yeah, well, I had to imagine. So this is a person who she lived primarily in the countryside all her life. She was very, very smart. Jane Austen was very clever, a genius. I think she was genius. And so I had to imagine what a person who was from a time before the Industrial Revolution, really, who knew nothing about machines. This is a person who travelled by horse and carriage. Everything was hand washed. Everything was hand cooked. So I had to imagine what things that she would find interesting about the 21st century. So the things that I thought that she would find interesting were cars, planes. She rides an escalator. She rides the tube in London. Another thing, in Jane's time, food was far more scarce than it is now. So I thought that she would be amazed by the amount of food that we have in the 21st century. What else? A washing machine. She's very impressed by a washing machine. A toilet. She likes a toilet. But the thing that struck me most about what she would find to herself personally, the most interesting thing about the 21st century is that she's famous now. So in the book, I have Jane going to a Jane Austen museum. There are Jane Austen museums in Bath. She goes to a bookshop and she sees her books in print. These are the things which were personally, I found, would have been the thing that entranced her most about the 21st century, because when she was alive, she was reasonably famous, but nowhere near as famous as she is now. So that was the main thing that I had fun with.
Yes, and we also see another important female character, Sophia, because they are sort of opposed, but maybe they are alike in some ways, because they are both independent, in a way searching for love, each in her own way, right? And they have to accept who they are and own who they are.
Yes, that's a lovely thought. Yes, that's right. Well, so Sophia, in the book, Sophia is an actress, and she is acting in a Jane Austen film. She's acting in a new production of Northanger Abbey. And Sophia, all her life throughout her career, she has believed that her only value lies in her looks. She's always been given roles where she plays the vixen or the sex pot. She has no confidence whatsoever in her acting talent. And Jane observes this, and at one point in the novel she actually remarks, so many things have changed for women since when she lived, but so many things have stayed the same. Women are still primarily sort of valued for their looks, and she encourages Sophia to discover her acting talent and go ahead and do the thing that she has been put on this earth to do, which is to act. So there's a parallel. Both women have very different stories because they're from different times, but the theme is the same, that women can be primarily valued for their looks, and but real fulfillment comes from doing the thing that you love, doing the thing that makes your heart sing. For Jane, it's writing. For Sophia, it's acting.
How do you think your experience as a screenwriter, as a director, a filmmaker, how did it come to into play with writing this book? Because reading it, it's very visual. How did it come to be like this?
I'm a screenwriter. So my day job is I work in television in Australia. I write for TV dramas. And I always had this idea for Jane in Love, about a Jane Austen that time travels to the present day and falls in love. And this falling in love makes all her books disappear. So she has to choose between her books and love. And I always pictured it as a film, actually. I always pictured it as a film. And I told a few friends and colleagues from the industry about Jane in Love, about my idea. And they said, you know, because it's so literary, it's for book lovers, why don't you write it as a book? So I thought, okay, I will. So I wrote it as a book. And I noticed that when you're writing a screenplay versus when you're writing a novel, it's a little bit different. When you're writing a screenplay, it's much more about the dialogue, and you don't really need to set the scene for the reader. When you're writing a novel, you need to put everything in there. What something looks like, what something smells like, what something tastes like, what the characters are thinking. Whereas a film, you don't need to do any of that. So that was interesting to see the difference. And now, now that Jane in Love has come out, it is actually being made into a movie.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's funny. It's come full circle. It started off as a film idea, and then it's turned into a book, and now it's going to be a film as well. Yeah.
Yes, does that make you nervous somehow? Because maybe you see it in a way when you write it and you have a picture in your head, and now it's going to come to the big screen. Or
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think everybody who reads a book and then it becomes a film, you have a picture in your head of what it's going to be, and then when you see it on film, it's not the same. So I think what I will have to do is just keep that memory, keep that image of what the film will be in my head, and then put that in a box and forget about it, and then just say the film is going to be something different, and it's going to be wonderful. It will be the director's interpretation of that. I'm writing the screenplay for it, so I'll have a little bit of involvement. But yes, no, it will be something different from what I imagined, but I'm sure it will be wonderful.
My last question to you is, what should the readers of this book take away from it after reading it? What's the idea?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was researching the book, I read Jane Austen's letters that she wrote to people. And she wrote beautiful letters, and she was very smart, and she was very funny. But a lot of the letters were quite sad as well. There was a long period in her life where, like I said before, she didn't write anything, because she was very depressed, because she was under pressure to marry. And that really consumed her, and it made her very sad. And she clearly wanted to fall in love, but also in that time, if Jane Austen, and I really believe this, if Jane Austen had married, I think she would have made a wonderful wife and a wonderful mother, but she would not have published anything. So what I would love readers to get from the book is that you've got one life, and you must do the thing that makes your heart sing. You must do the thing that makes you happy. And that's the meaning of life, really. And that's what I hope readers take away from this.
Rachel Givney, thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you, Marina. Lovely to chat.